Welcome to the Communication Diva Podcast, episode number 2. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Communication Diva Podcast, the podcast that aims to help you improve your communication skills, which will in turn help to improve the relationships in your life. It's 3 days to Christmas here, and we've been very busy in our family. We've had a family member undergo open heart surgery last week, and we are really thankful that she's doing very well. She's up and walking around a bit already, which really is astounding when you consider what is involved in that surgery. We've also had a big family dinner already that had about 17 people gathered for dinner, and that was a lot of work, but it was a wonderful evening. So all this to say that I'm a little bit late in getting this next podcast up. I was hoping to post things every Monday, but so far that's not working. I guess with the holidays, it will be a little bit like that. And in any case, what I wanted to talk to you today about is how to be a better listener in just a few minutes. So I titled this podcast 10 Minutes to Better Listening. The podcast itself might be longer than 10 minutes, but you can be a better listener in your own life in as little as 10 minutes of sitting down and thinking about this stuff, which is why I named it 10 Minutes to Better Listening. So I think that that's probably worth it. Taking 10 minutes out of your busy life to sit down and think about listening skills and maybe even going over to the show notes on the website at communicationdiva.com to read through the list and see if there are things that you can do to improve your listening. Now, maybe you're a fabulous listener and that's great. Listening, though, is a skill, and it takes a lot of practice. And even people who are really good at communicating can't listen properly all of the time. It's just impossible. When asked what is the most important element in communication, many people will respond with the word listening. It's sort of like exercise. It's something that we all know we need to do, but maybe we don't do it as often as we should, you know? Which seems to be true for me as far as the exercise goes anyway. So why is that? I think it's because it takes time and it takes effort. And it sounds really easy to listen, but really it's not. We get distracted. Things are on our minds, etc. Listening and hearing are not the same thing. And if you live with teenagers, you'll know this to be true. They might hear you say something, but again, hearing is not listening. We hear things all the time that we don't process or pay attention to. For example, you are likely hearing things right now that you're not processing. So if you're driving while you're listening to this, you might not be noticing the motor of the vehicle, the sound of the motor of the vehicle you're driving. You might be hearing it, but you may not be listening to it or paying attention to it. If you're sitting in your home right now, you may be hearing the hum of the fridge or the sound of the air coming through the heat vent, or you might be hearing, people elsewhere in your house, but you may not be listening to that closely. So hearing and listening are definitely not the same thing. And what we want to be doing when we're learning to listen better is what we call active listening. And this means that you are actually present. Your body might be there, but you need your mind to be there at the same time. And in the coaching world, we call active listening, we call it level 2 listening. Just hearing would be level 1. And hearing something and then talking about yourself would be level 1. Active listening is level 2. There is a level 3, but we'll talk about that another time. And again, today we're going to talk about active listening or level 2 listening. And again, it's a skill. It takes work and practice, and it really is impossible to do all of the time. It'd be lovely, but it's impossible. So before we get to how to do that, I wanted to talk about a lot of the barriers that there are to active listening and why it's impossible to do it all of the time. And you might recognize some of these things in yourself. So one of them is being preoccupied with something else. So maybe you've got too much going on in your life, too much going on in your brain, you're worrying about something, or you're thinking about something else. And although your body is present and you might be really good at making it look like you're listening, you might be nodding and you might be smiling and you might be making eye contact, but you may actually not be there. You might be thinking about what you're going to have for lunch, or, all the things on your list that you haven't accomplished today, or some conversation you had a while ago that you're miffed about. And the sure sign of not being present is when the person asks you a question and suddenly you find that you haven't been paying attention at all and you have no idea what the person is talking about. It's a little bit embarrassing. It's happened to me several times. Because I'm really good at looking like I'm listening, but sometimes I'm not actually there for whatever reason. I'm not engaged. I don't really care about whatever the person is talking about, or I'm distracted. So that's a barrier to active listening, and it's a pretty common one. If someone says to you, "Did you just hear what I said?" then that's a clue that maybe your mind was not actually present, even though your body was. So that's one thing. So if you're going to actively listen, you need to actually be present in body and mind. Another barrier could be external noise. So you might be in a loud environment. You might be in a crowded place where there's lots going on. There's people, there's music, there's construction, and it's really hard to hear. You might actually have to yell. Or you might be on a bad phone connection or something. And that can be a barrier to actively listening. It can be really hard work. Sometimes actively listening is difficult when the other person has a heavy accent that you're not familiar with. So it can be hard to tune your ear to understanding the words. If the person is speaking, again, with an accent that is not something you're familiar to hearing. Sometimes after a while you get tuned into an accent and you understand the person a whole lot better because your ear gets trained. But if you're not used to it, then it can be a challenge. And you can imagine how tiring it is for somebody who has come to your place where you live and is trying to learn your language, and how exhausting it is to actively listen so that they can understand the words that are being said around them. I know I've traveled to other places in the world and it's been very difficult listening. It's tiring. And trying to understand what the other person is saying if you're not familiar or very familiar with the language. So that's something. Hearing disabilities can also be an issue to active listening and to good communication. Sometimes you're not aware that the other person has a hearing disability. And so if you're not aware of that, the other person may not be picking up everything that you were talking about. I have a story about a student that I had once. I was working in the hospital, and the student had hearing disabilities. But as a teacher, we're not allowed to say anything about that to anybody else. That's personal, private, confidential information. The student's allowed to divulge that, but we aren't. So I was supervising her clinical placement. This is again for the nursing unit clerk program. And if you're interested in finding out what job that is, you can check out the post that I put on the blog about that. I'll put that in the show notes as well. But I was supervising a student who had hearing disabilities, and very quickly, I didn't realize what was going on because after a while I forgot about it. She would sit at the front of the classroom. She would do a lot of lip reading. She would face me when I was speaking. And so we didn't really have any problems. But I sort of forgot about that. And then when the months and months of in-class training were over and she was in the hospital doing her clinical, and I went to see her, there were some definite vibes I was picking up from the preceptor, the person who was looking after her on the unit. and the student. And I thought, what is going on here? There's something not right. I took each of them aside separately, and they were both quite annoyed with one another. And they had to work together for a good 6 to 7 weeks, one teaching the other. And I was thinking, this is not good. This is about day 3. And from, the student was saying, well, the preceptor's not telling me anything anymore. She won't tell me anything. And the preceptor told me separately, well, she's not listening to anything I say, and she keeps asking me the same questions over and over again. And suddenly it dawned on me what was going on. There was a lack of communication there because the student had not revealed to the preceptor that she had a hearing difficulty and that she needed to be facing the preceptor when communicating so that she could do some lip reading. So I ended up asking the student privately if she thought it might be a good idea for her to let the preceptor know what was going on. And I think there was a little bit of hesitancy there, but I think in the end she decided she would because we weren't allowed to. And that way they started over again, and it ironed itself out, and within a day they were doing really well together and did really well the rest of the 6 or 7 weeks. So that was a big communication barrier, and definitely a barrier to active listening because there was a miscommunication there that had a huge impact. So that was one barrier. Another barrier to good communication, good listening, active listening, is that some people have never considered how well they listen or don't listen. And again, this can present problems because it's a skill. I mean, we all figure, oh yeah, we know how to listen. But if you haven't actually ever considered things that make a good listener, ingredients that make for good listening, then you may not be doing it as well as you think you are. Another thing is assuming you know what the other person is going to say before they ever say it. Now, I know someone who finishes my sentences whenever I see her, and it drives me absolutely nuts. Sometimes I'll say something bizarre and random at the end of a sentence just to see what will happen because it's kind of funny. But this person assumes that she knows exactly what I'm going to say, and therefore she's really not listening to me. I'll get partway through a sentence and she'll finish it. And I'm thinking, oh, this is really, besides being an annoying habit, this means she's not really giving me credit and paying attention to what I have to say. So assuming you know what the other person is going to say. Now, sometimes if you know that person really, really, really well, you might be right some of the time, but you're not going to be right 100% of the time. And even if you've lived with somebody for a very long time, it's important every once in a while to sit down and ask them what's going on and to actively listen. And you'll probably be quite amazed at what comes out if that happens. So those are some of the things, and there are more, but those are some of the things that can be big barriers to active or deep listening or level 2 listening. And so just pay attention to those. There might be some of those things going on when you're trying to have a conversation. But even if you do actively listen some of the time, because again, it's impossible to do it all of the time, but if you do it well some of the time, you will find that this will make a big difference in your conversations. So, how do you improve your listening? Well, here is where the 10 minutes comes in. If you pay attention to the next bit here, and again, maybe write some of it down or go to www.communicationdiva.com and see the show notes where I have it all written out for you. And then if you test this out on somebody, you might just find that you're doing a better job of listening in a very short amount of time. And for many people, this is a time of year when we are gathering with family members and with friends, and listening comes into play in a big way. So here is a list of things that you can do. And if you take about 10 minutes to pay attention to this, you will find a big difference. So, number 1, get rid of all distractions. Turn the cell phone to vibrate, or better yet, turn it off and put it out of sight. uh, people say that they can text while they're listening, but that is not being fully present. And so in that case, that's not really active listening. So the cell phone needs to go off and be put away. Turn the TV off, or the computer, or anything else that might distract you. It is an honor to the other person to actually give them their full attention. It's very rare for us these days in this crazy busy world to actually feel like someone is giving you their full attention. And so it's actually a gift to give the other person your full attention, even for a few moments. The other thing to do is to face the person you're listening to. Now, if you're on the phone, that's difficult, of course, but if you're on the phone, just make sure you're not doing anything else. You can even close your eyes and listen. So face the person if you're face to face. If you are face to face, make some eye contact. And this doesn't have to be creepy, and you don't have to stare at the person continually. But looking somebody in the eye lets them know that you are listening. Now, I know that there are some people listening to this from around the world, and I know that there are some cultural differences around the practice of eye contact in different parts of the world. So even being aware of cultural differences, if you are communicating with someone who is not of your culture, will make a difference. Because in some cases, making direct eye contact is considered to be rude or unacceptable. So if you're aware of that, then the person not looking you in the eye might not be being rude. They might be following their what's normal for them in their culture. So just pay attention to that. I know in North America that eye contact is expected. That is, part of our cultural context. So eye contact in this part of the world and in several other parts of the world is the norm, but there are instances where culturally it's completely the opposite, and it's rude to look people in the eye. So if you can't look the person in the eye for whatever reason, at least be facing the person with your body to indicate that you are there, you are present, and you're ready to listen. The next thing is to use what we call minimal encouragers. And you probably do this automatically and maybe just don't have a name for it. This is when you say things like, uh-huh, or yeah, or yes, or I see. It's something minimal, a very short little verbal exclamation that encourages the person along and allows them to know that you are listening. And the thing here is to remember that you are listening and not talking. So a little uh-huh or yeah or a smile or a laugh or something like that is encouraging them to continue. The next thing is to focus on the other person, not yourself. So if you are trying to be a better listener, then the trick is to not latch on to what the other person is saying and then launch into a great big long story about yourself, because then this stops being a listening exercise. Right? If you're seriously trying to be a better listener, then what you need to do is wait till the other person has finished their story and then asks for yours. And this can be challenging, You might almost need to sit on your hands and just wait, because they might say something that brings up 2 or 3 stories in your mind or experiences that you've had. But if you're trying to listen better, then it's the other person's turn to be the one who talks. So along the same lines as that is the idea to try not to interrupt. And unless you need to clarify something they just said so that you can understand it. I really have to watch this because I interrupt when I shouldn't. And part of it, I think, is because my brain goes a mile a minute and wants to interject. So if you can, resist the urge and just wait. Right? And try not to interrupt. If they are saying something and they keep talking and you've latched onto something they've said, 2 minutes ago and you're confused about it, you might want to say, okay, wait a minute. Before you keep going, can we go back to what you just said here? And can I just get clear that this is what you meant? And that's perfectly fine. That's a perfectly fine kind of interrupting, because again, you're not focusing on yourself. You're still focusing on the other person, and you're just trying to figure out that what you heard was indeed what they intended. So that's okay. The other thing to do is to paraphrase to clarify. And a paraphrase is when you use your own words to repeat back something that the person has said or to clarify the way you think somebody is feeling. So if they say something like, oh, there's nothing to do around here, you might paraphrase it with, oh, sounds like you're bored. So you're using your words, but you're echoing what they have said, and you're getting some clarification around the sentiment behind the words. So that's paraphrasing. The word para means around, and phrase. So around the phrase. So you're going around the phrase. The next thing to do is to use open-ended questions to encourage conversation. And an open-ended question is one that you cannot answer with a yes or a no. An open-ended question usually starts with one of the W words. So who, what, where, when, why. And you can also start with how or with something like, tell me about blah, blah, blah. So these kinds of questions are going to get more out of the other person than simply asking a yes or no question. And if you're in an awkward, situation, you're at a party, you've just met somebody, you want to know more about them. If you use questions that can be answered with a yes or no, the conversation is going to stall. So using open-ended questions can be very helpful in getting more information out of the other person, allowing the conversation to deepen a little bit, and allowing the conversation to continue. So open-ended questions are great tools to have in your communication toolbox that will help you to further conversation and deeper conversation. Another thing you can use is silence in some situations. Now, we're not too comfortable with silence in North America because it's so busy here and loud and all the rest of it. But silence is a fabulous tool to get people to open up and talk, especially if they think you are really actively listening. So just being quiet sometimes will create almost a vacuum, and the other person will feel like they need to fill in that void and will continue to talk. So silence can be a wonderful tool. And I know, again, I keep going back to talking about being in my classroom, but sometimes I will ask, does anybody have any questions? And then I wait for quite a long time. And eventually somebody might get up, the courage or think of something that they want to ask, and they'll ask it. But I find if I say, does anybody have any questions? Nope. Okay. And then keep going, then I've lost an opportunity to maybe clarify something for somebody. So silence is an excellent tool to use. Another thing to do is to listen beyond words. So watch the other person's body language for clues about how they are doing in the conversation and what's going on for them. Body language can tell an awful lot. It communicates a lot, and I've actually got a whole episode and an interview with somebody on body language coming up for you hopefully next week. So that I won't go into too much here, but body language will give you a lot of information on what's going on for the person. Listen to how they say things, not just what they say. And again, we'll talk about that in a different episode, the topic of paralanguage, how someone says something, not just what they say. But if you are sitting there getting the sense that there's more going on than the words the person is using, then maybe you want to call them on that and say, I'm getting the sense from what you're saying that this is what's going on for you. Am I right? So that would be a paraphrase, actually. It would be listening beyond words, watching the other person's body language, listening to how they say things. And maybe you'll end up with more information that way. A big thing is to resist problem solving. Listening is just that. It's listening. It's not offering to fix things. It's not offering to solve things. It's not giving advice. Stephen Covey, who is a fantastic speaker and writer, has an excellent example of a father not listening to his son and being confused about why his son won't listen to him. in his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And I will link to that as well in the show notes, because if you haven't read that book, it's been around for a while. It was published, I think, in 1989. If you haven't read that book, it's full of an awful lot of excellent information for communication. And he talks quite a bit about listening. So I highly recommend that. And I will, again, link to that in my show notes. So in order to be able to understand somebody else, you first need to listen, because what you assume is going on for them may not be right at all. And there's no way to know what's actually going on without checking in, because we can't read minds. And what we think is going on for someone else may not be accurate at all. So try not to solve their problems or give advice when it's not asked for. Often people just want to vent, and they just want to tell you that they've had a crappy day. And they don't want you to say, well, you should have done this, and you should have done that, and you should have done this. They just want to get off their chest what was going on for them. And to be an active listener, the best response would be, wow, sounds like you had a miserable day. I'm sorry that happened for you. That would be a better, more helpful response than launching into what you would have done had you been there, because you weren't there. So that's something that a lot of us do. So this has been a lot of information, and I think if you really want to improve your listening, take a few minutes, think about the list, and then go and practice this on unsuspecting family and friends, because you can do this with no one knowing what the heck it is you're doing. And just see what happens. Chances are, even if you try this once or twice, you'll notice a difference in communication and in how your conversations go. And if you do this, I would love for you to tell me about it. In my class, I have my students write a little report after this exercise, and sometimes the results are quite remarkable. But if you wouldn't mind dropping me a line, coming over to communicationdiva.com and sending me a note on Facebook or in the comments section, I would love to hear that if you actually take this information and go and try it out. Because again, it's practice, it's skill. So that's the end of this session, and I thank you very much for taking the time to listen. I have some guest interviews coming up, and as I said before, I'm going to try and post the next one as early as next week, probably later in the week because of the holidays. So watch for those, and I'm sure you'll get some great ideas and entertainment out of those interviews. I know I've learned a lot just from the process of interviewing these people, and I've had a lot of fun doing it too. So if you're celebrating Christmas, Merry Christmas, or Hanukkah, Happy Hanukkah, or Winter Solstice, which was last night, whatever your celebration, I wish you rest and peace, and I hope that you enjoy each other in deep and in meaningful conversation. This is Jen Swanson at Communication Diva. Until next time, bye-bye.